So I'm going to ask a question, and I think I'm just going to ask it, and hopefully you'll understand the spirit of it, because I think about this a lot, and obviously, not obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but I think it's important that we do accept people for who they are. If nobody's hurting anybody else, obviously, right? The things that I think you and I would probably agree on. But again, in the spirit of part of the reason I do this show is I want to bring the unconscious, sometimes the uncomfortable things to light, because I
Yeah,
think that's how we solve with them and we figure them out, right?
absolutely.
I can imagine there's some people that hear what you're saying, even good people who are trying to process and think, but they have this view. Science is often thrown into this, and science is a whole other thing that we could debate. But whether it be around gender fluidity, whether it be about the traditional, quote unquote, traditional heterosexual, like, but that's the quote unquote natural order, right? That's the way science.
Yeah,
A man and a
I've
woman
heard
have
this
sex, they
before.
procreate, a baby is born, right? And that doesn't have to pass a judgment to say that the queer lifestyle or a different lifestyle is wrong, but just an acknowledgement that it's not the quote unquote natural view of it, right? Again, I'm not saying that's right or anything like that, but how do you think about that? Because in some ways, there's a very literal truth to that. Of like, I understand, right? If maybe I'm not well versed in this enough to know that if you go back to early cavemen or even just the animal kingdom, that there is a traditional way. But that thought process that some people have, where they say, I can even get on board with it, but let's just acknowledge that this isn't science or whatever.
I
How do you
can't
think about
acknowledge
that?
that.
You're right.
I
I
can't.
agree. So yeah, talk to me about that.
I can't acknowledge that. If you do go back to ancient history, you will find if you're actually reading the science and not just reading the BuzzFeed news that comes through. If you look at the actual science behind, there is documentations, anthropological and biological documentations on queer identities of the past. Especially when you go and look at tribal life
Mm.
that's still around and tribal life of the past, you will see that there was and is people who are gender fluid and people who have had relationships that were of the same gender. You will also see in biology that there are chromosomes that can set off in the right environment, just like there are lots of genetic genetic I'm starting over my words here. There's a lot of proof through genetics that when you're set off in a certain environment, certain genes will pop off. So you might be predispositioned to have certain personality traits. And under the certain conditions, those personality traits will thrive, will pop out, right? You might be predispositioned um, to feel more as a woman versus a man. And if you're looking at the binary, the female male, you might be predispositioned to mentally feel one way or another, but under the right environmental circumstances, you're not understanding that, you're not getting the chance to express that. And when you do, you feel better, you feel more yourself. There's also some brain studies that have been done that have shown that there's areas of the brain that are firing off differently for transgender people. So if you were born male, for instance, and you felt like a woman, a cis woman your whole life, and you wind up going ahead and transitioning, and they've studied your brain when you were a kid, that brain looked similar to a feminine cis woman's brain, and vice versa. So there are a lot of things out there that just have not been allowed to be taught because of state laws. Your kids could be learning about this stuff and understand this stuff if the schools are allowed to teach science properly.
Mm. And there's an
If they're
interesting
allowed,
question in that of
yeah,
like, why? Why are people I think the first level answer to why those things are restricted by state laws in some case is people, it would have to be logically, I think people are worried if you teach that, it's going to encourage it, maybe
no,
it's going to force people into it,
no,
which to me I always find that very fascinating, because no, right, obviously I agree, right, the thought of
no.
that um
Just like
it,
just
it
no.
seems unlikely, but even if it did, I think what people don't reckon with enough is, why do you think that's a problem? Let's say that's true. Let's say you did that and more people became non-binary or homosexual, whatever it is. there's a reckoning there of like you admitting, but I don't like that. I don't want more people like that. And why? Why don't you want more people like that? And I think that's a really interesting thread, not even interesting, important thread to go down to understand, right? Um, most people will stop at the you're gonna infiltrate our kids and you're gonna get them to be this way. And again, we can have a whole discussion of how that doesn't hold, right? But even if it did, why does that upset you? What is the fear you think people have about a society where there are people who are more gender fluid, where we do, and to me, it almost goes back a little bit to that growth versus like holistic living thing. Um, it's that why are we afraid to allow people to just be exactly what they are? Is there a fear that society is going to crumble? Is there a fear that I don't know? What do you think? Like, what do you think is at the root of that fear, at the very base of it?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's fear, but fear isn't always rational, right?
No, for sure, for sure. Well,
Uh,
I like to think there's always a logic. It's not a good logic. There's like big L logic and little L. So there's something, a calculation in their head that's getting them to that point. I don't think it's blind. I'm not saying it's right, obviously. But what do you think it, or do you think differently? Do you think it's just completely irrational? There's not really a logic to it?
yeah. Well, it's not true. If you take a look at my history,
Sure.
um, I was shown heterosexual stuff my whole life, and I'm gay.
There you go.
So there's logic number one.
Good. Yep.
So if I'm showing heterosexual kids books with families that have two moms or two dads, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be gay.
Agreed. Agreed.
What it does show is that you're able to teach your kids to be empathetic and accepting and respectful of diversity.
But that's
Just
the
like
part
when you're
that
showing different ethnicities in these textbooks, your kid is not going to all of a sudden want to go travel across the world to live in another country to be just like that person just because they saw it in a book.
mm, mm,
You also have to understand that your kids might explore and experiment with their identity because it's part of their natural childhood development. So, from puberty throughout high school, they're going on a journey. They're going on a journey pushing boundaries against their parents' beliefs. They're going on a journey trying to see themselves outside of their parents and who they are. And they're exploring and experimenting in many different ways. And they could be doing that safely, knowing that their parents will be respectful of them through this process. Or they could be doing that in a very dangerous way
mm,
where they're putting their health and safety at risk because they're trying so hard to find themselves and push back. So they make push back harder and harder. The parents are holding too tightly.
sure.
You could have a variety of ways that that comes across. And for some kids, they might explore their gender identity a little bit. They might explore sexuality a little bit. I'm sure you've heard of people talking about in college how they had that one kiss with that
Sure.
other
Sure.
same-sex person and that fling during that sorority party or whatever, but they're coming out in a marriage with the same with our opposite sex, heterosexual. You could. There is definitely um, things that you would notice and see and be able to discuss with your child to see if this was a path they're sticking to or if this was an exploration of who they are. And you'll notice a pattern, I'm sure, if you had a healthy environment where they were subjected to a lot of diversity, you'll notice a pattern as they're growing up that is showing a leniency in one direction or another and a deep rooted need versus wanting to fit in with other kids.
But why do you think the parents, the administrator, whatever it is, the people that don't want kids going on that journey, what do you why? What are they afraid of?
They're afraid of and not matching them. People, all right. So if you're looking at, I'm going to use high school. If you're looking at high school cafeteria, you'll probably see clusters of kids. You'll probably see the clusters of the soccer players, the artists. Probably see a cluster of this yes English a second language groups of kids that are speaking bilingual to each other. You might see a drama kids. You're going to see clusters. They're all trying to find people that are like them, right? We're very attracted to seeing ourselves in others. It's a very innate, deep rooted need from in biology for us to feel part of a tribe, feel that we are accepted and connected to a group. So my theory is that the fear stems from the kid leaving that group.
Mm.
What's going to happen to my child? They're not in my clan anymore. They're not matching us anymore. They're the black sheep now. They're different. And so they want to pull it in close and keep them sheltered and safe to what they know and understand as part of their tribe, as part of their cluster, their group.
Wonder if that doesn't circle back as we're coming towards the end here to where you started with self-compassion. I wonder
Yeah.
if those parents, if they didn't have more self-compassion in their life, because I find this to be true. There's very few things I'm really, really confident and certain of. I have a son who's 9 years old now. And I tell him all the time, because as every kid, there's times where he's like, "Oh, is this going to be weird if I do this?" And I say, every single person is weird. Everybody is weird.
Yeah.
Just most people are afraid to admit it. And in the spirit of that, if those same parents didn't practice more self-compassion to say, "Hey, the weird, quote unquote, weird stuff about me, that's okay.
Yes.
That's who I am." How much easier it would then be for them to do it for their children and other, people in society. And maybe that's the beautiful illustration of that value that you started with, of why it's not just about you, even that self-compassion. It's allowing you to
Yeah.
bring that to the rest of the world as well. It gives you permission to do it for others. And that's, if that doesn't hammer home why it's important, I don't know what does.